out of all of that, what do you want to ask me about now to elaborate on? How about that?
Sure. Maybe just some of the things that were missed just for the interest time. We're on the second episode and everything it's anything now. Meteorology.
Yes.
It's an important thing to name a thing. And you chose that. I know more than one person who has moved to Oklahoma to study meteorology because Oklahoma has some of the weirdest weather, enough that the weather nerds come here to be weather nerds. So why specifically meteorology?
Again, growing up in Moore, my entire life to this day, I can tell people, I grew up in Moore, and an overwhelming majority of the time the response is, "Oh, I'm sorry." Moore is where tornadoes are made. It's where they come from.
The tornado factory, if you will.
Yeah, and it's somewhere right on the outskirts of the neighborhood I grew up in. I was always kind of hyper aware of them. I understood that it was a dangerous thing. I understood that when there was, tornado warning and sirens and everything as a kid, that we needed to do something. But I was also living there in 99 when the first really, really big one came through. It was headed directly for my neighborhood before it took that kind of miraculous sharp turn that the May 3rd, 99 tornado took. And I always felt like, wow, we just got exceptionally, unbelievably lucky. I was still living in the same house with my parents in 2013, May 20th, 2013, when the other, even somehow larger one came in taking the exact same path and did not take that turn. It missed my house by a couple hundred yards, maybe. Devastated. I mean, razed to the ground a lot of the neighborhoods that I grew up in, driving around in. But moreover than even that experience of the devastation and everything afterwards and having to still kind of live there, I don't know if you ever experienced something like having to be stopped at a National Guard stop and you have to show your ID that has your address so that they let you into your neighborhood because there's so much destruction. But even before all of that, when it was coming, I was paying attention to it. I was living at my parents' house. They did not have a storm shelter at the time. And so as they talked about it getting worse and worse and worse and more destructive and more powerful, I thought, well, I'll do what I always do. I'll get in the bathroom with the two dogs. It was just myself and my stepfather at home, and my stepfather was a former Marine. He went out to the garage and he brought in a flak jacket, a bulletproof vest, and a helmet, and said, well, this is all we got. Well, even then I was bigger than he ever was. So I put the vest on and it didn't quite close and my chest is exposed and I can't button it or anything. So I found myself in the bathroom, two dogs on leashes, wearing this vest, and balled myself up real tightly with my knees all the way up against my chest and tried to kind of lock my arms and thought, okay, all you have to do is hold that position as hard as you can, because when it throws you, you'll have less of a chance of something going through your chest. Mm. I sat there, the power went out, and it got dark. It got darker and louder and louder and louder and louder. And it's the one real main sustained time in my life where I've just kind of thought, okay, might die. And became so convinced it was going to hit and it was going to be devastating that when the noise got louder and louder and louder and then quieter and a little quieter and a little quieter, the first thought in my mind was not, okay, I think it's passed. the only thought in my mind was it must get quieter before it hits you, because the possibility of it not hitting was gone from my brain by that point. When I finally stood up, walked outside, found my stepdad, who was standing outside. That's a whole other story. And he said it passed. I panicked and thought it was going to come back, and went back to the bathroom and got ready for it again. Needless to say, there was something that snapped and kind of broke in my mind a little bit. I am told, obviously, since that it is a form of PTSD. It then became the most debilitating fear that I've ever experienced for a long time. Any tornado threat, any tornado warning, absolutely crushing panic. There was therapy involved. And then I started just kind of digging into it, right? Very shortly after, that was 2013. By 2015 was my first time writing for the Oklahoma Gazette. I pitched them a story where I said I'd really like to explore weather anxiety and tornado anxiety, not by talking to psychologists or anything, but by talking to weather scientists and actual meteorologists. I want to know their perspective on the anxiety that people feel about it. And I spoke to Dr. Berrien Moore III, who was the director of the National Weather Center at the time in Norman. And I spoke to Professor Howard Bluestein, who was the head of the meteorology department at OU. And he said that he actually grew up with a very similar situation. He grew up in Kansas, and there was a massive tornado that came through Kansas when he was young. And he was so scared by it that he became fascinated by it. He said, the best advice I could give anybody that experiences that kind of anxiety is the advice that you give anybody that has any kind of fear. Learn about it. The more that you demystify it, the more power you take away from it.
The monster has no teeth.
Exactly. So I did. I started just diving into deep meteorological science. Never went to school for it or anything, but just started unpacking it and started trying to dissect it as much as I could. To the point that, like, now, for example, I do still experience a lot of that fear. I really do. But they do also say there's this like 7-year rule about trauma, right? That about 7 years after a substantial trauma is when your brain is able to start course correcting, and you're able to kind of start walking back and not having the same kind of visceral, you stop reliving it so much when you find yourself. But now, for example, like I don't look to TV meteorologists for forecasts or anything. I read the National Weather Service and the Storm Prediction Center technical reports every day. And I like that. It's cold and it's statistical and it's data. And my favorite thing about it is that like the Storm Prediction Center, which is where all of the meteorologists nationwide get all of their information from, they make it very clear in their technical discussions every day when something is an extremely conditional forecast, or they don't really know, or it's not. And then you'll watch it go through this game of telephone where by the time it gets to the news meteorologists, they're like, we're looking out for a tornado outbreak and it's going to be massive. So all of which is to say that in addition to everything else, storms and weather and the power of them and the unpredictability of them are one of the main things that have terrified me. And exactly like Batman, I decided to name myself after my greatest fear. And then, again, I know that I have a tendency to be long-winded about just about everything, but there's another element to the name meteorology that nobody ever picks up on. The Weather Report.
Oh, yeah.
The band The Weather Report.
Yeah.
Right. So I love The Weather Report, and that's cool. But do you know where their name came from?
No.
The Weather Underground.
Okay.
The Weathermen, the 60s and 70s leftist extremist group. That's the other angle to meteorology that nobody else ever picks up on, is that in addition to it being about my own fears, there is definitely an element that it is also a name that represents a lot of my own kind of inclinations,
Sure.
Politically and societally, which is also why, anytime that I like have a show and I let the venue come up with the imagery or something or the poster, everyone immediately defaults to weather imagery. And I'm always like, okay, cool, whatever, that's fine, but you'll never really see me incorporating weather imagery into my own imagery for meteorology or anything, because for the most part, that's not necessarily where I'm coming at with it. It's more about, Bob Dylan's. Well, that's where the Weathermen took their name and where the Weather Underground came from, is you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. So,
no, that's really, I mean, an interesting thing about it is that, like, not just necessarily the, like, meteorology doesn't necessarily mean weather, it means the study of weather. And so, like, I do find it kind of neat. And you were talking about how you take your deep dives and fascinations into things. And so how now you've learned to read the code of
what it feels like.
Yeah. It's very like Oklahoma.
Yeah.
As well. Like, I mean, again, as I preface the question, is that like the weather nerds come here for the weather things. When I first moved here from Venezuela, I was very anxious about tornado activity, but we always lived in OKC or Edmond and back in OKC. So like I've always kind of stayed in like Northwest OKC and then Edmondish. So it became kind of a boy who cried wolf situation for me, where it's like, well, it always like goes somewhere else. And so like, maybe inevitably, right, the day will come where it does actually hit, unfortunately. But like, it is this sort of weird mental training that we've done, which is like, oh, well, we see what the path is, and for some reason more keeps getting that path. Now, it has been changing lately because of climate change, which is a bit odd and concerning, and maybe a little bit of relief.
No. In fact, actually, I've been hearing it for years. I've been hearing it almost my entire life. For years, it was, well, I think it's getting better. I think Tornado Alley is actually moving more to the east.
Mm-hmm.
That was never true.
Okay.
A lot of people thought that was true. No, Tornado Alley, first of all, is a really stupid and nebulous and kind of meaningless designation. But the dry line is really what you're talking about. Storms, primarily major single cellular storms that produce long track and destructive tornadoes. They form off of the dry line. The dry line has a tendency to set up somewhere along the central plains. For a while, I think that there was a bit of time where maybe it just naturally was, for some reason, pushing a little bit more to the east into eastern Oklahoma. But for the most part, it's setting up now, at this point in time in 2026, more significantly in the Texas Panhandle and points west, which means that the more and more west that it pushes, the more it's going to continue firing long track supercellular storms that are then not going to usually make it through central Oklahoma and the Oklahoma City metro until the overnight hours, which means that
they're more dangerous.
Well, it means they're more dangerous, and it definitely means that it is going to continue increasing our likelihood of 2 and 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning tornado threat, but also naturally has a tendency to reduce the tornado threat because that's more and more hours before they make it to the metro that the sun has been down and you're not getting diurnal heating. That's what they call it.
So I'll be explicit in the my approach in coming back to bit depth with this very intentional sense also includes this focus on local, right? And I was starting to before it went to sleep, but I am coming back to it in this very like, if I am local, then this is a local show. And I'm sure there will be, the occasional out of town Zoom recording. People don't use Zoom anymore. Riverside recording.
I use Zoom. What is that? What is Riverside?
Riverside is like is specifically like for podcasts.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. I use Zoom.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, in that local is the I don't know, especially as I've gotten older, I've seen how like, oh, it's not about like making it doesn't look like this lofty idea of like doing a whole bunch of selling out arena tours or whatever. That's virtually impossible at this point, and that's fine.
Yeah, really.
But that this is what community is. It's not like, I mean, sure, we can have active Discord servers, and that's neat in its own sense, but local is, I mean, a little bit closer to what your definition of success is. And this is all kind of a weird diverging thing that I'm rambling about, but I don't know. It doesn't get more local Oklahoma than like nerding out about tornadoes.
Yeah. Well, I come from some bands, right? I was in a band for 17 years called Saturn. We had a couple full length albums, had a big EP. Like so many things, that band didn't survive COVID. And so there were some other projects, and the kind of intervening after that, including another band where we spent a very, very long time trying to come up with a name. As anybody trying to sustain any kind of new band does. And these days it's all about searchability and SEO and who's got it and is it available. And you kick a name around and then everybody deep dives Apple Music and Spotify and Bandcamp and everything to see if there's something else. The first time that, and I experimented with, the Meteorologist, and a lot of that, a number of those have been taken in different ways. When I discovered that Meteorology had not been taken as an artist name, I was like, oh crap. Like, I feel like I have a service to myself now.
Yeah.
I have to, get on that. Even if I'm going to get a squat on it, I don't know. Well, when I was starting another band and we were going through a long period of trying to find a name for it, I was like, Meteorology. It's so cool. It's not been taken. And it was shot down on the basis of sounds too Oklahoma. It sounds too specific to Oklahoma. And, that was cool because the other people involved in that project, that's not the way that they wanted to present it. So then when I began developing something, which ended up finally being more fully fleshed out for Mental Mondays with Jarvix, that became Weirder Wednesday, which is how you and I know one another, from, I believe, the very first one.
Probably,
yeah. I think so. Immediately it felt right for me to use that name for my entirely personal, entirely solo project. At that point, it didn't matter if it feels like it was tied to Oklahoma, because I'm tied to Oklahoma. That's who I am, for better and for worse. So yeah, it's always felt immediately right, which is something that I have never, ever, ever felt about any other name or designation I've tried to use for anything. And it was always, It's always been nice that more often than not, when I say, "Oh yeah, my product it's called Meteorology," people usually go, "Oh, cool, that's a cool name."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's unique without sounding strange to hear it as like the name of a quote unquote band or musical project.
Mm-hmm. Like many local musicians before they've been humbled by the realities of life, did you ever have a point where you were like, "Oh, I'm gonna get out of here"?
Yeah, that's actually something I've spoken about quite a lot. Quite a lot. I talk about this in especially a lot of the time in live events that I do for something like On the Scene. I spent the majority of my kind of creative and performing life convinced that the goal was to transcend your community. Mm-hmm. It was nobody wants to be a local band. Mm-hmm. You just want to be a band. Yeah. You don't want anybody looking at you and go, "Oh yeah, it was a local band just kind of from this area." You're a nationwide band, a worldwide band. And because of that, I wasted so much time believing that the goal is to increase your play numbers online. The goal is to increase your followers. The goal is to do all of these other things that are not engaged with the other people being creative in your community. I do feel, I don't for a second ever, and would never feel like the music that I made and the stuff that I did with those bands or anything was a waste of time. It was absolutely not. And I'm still deeply happy and proud of the stuff that we did. But I feel like I wasted my own energies personally for a long time, believing that I was just trying to break out, was just trying to make it, was just trying to finally get a path out of Oklahoma so I could go somewhere and actually be successful and somewhere where people are actually going to care. And I resent that about myself. I remember the day and the moment that changed. Like I said previously, and what I guess is now the previous episode, I spent about 10 years in the liquor industry. I was working in a liquor store where I met Joey Powell of Rainbows Are Free. Great, fantastic dude. He's had 100,000 bands, sometimes all at once. And he came in actually as a customer and was talking about how his band was going to be playing at the Blue Note later that night. And I was like, yeah, no, that's awesome. I'll see if I can round some people up to go. Nobody could go. It was a Thursday night or something. I don't even know. Nobody could go. And I thought, well, whatever. I could stay home. I thought, no, I'd really like to go. And Joey seems really cool. I didn't know him all that well at the time. Joey seems really cool. And I want to see his band. And his band sounds cool. And he said, they've got this really great touring act from Austin that's coming up to play with them. And so I just went out by myself, which at the time was very different and out of the ordinary for me. Went to a Blue Note show by myself, had a fantastic time. The opening band was out of Austin. They were called Migrant Kids. They kicked all the asses. They absolutely ruled and destroyed, and they were so good. And they were just this little band out of Austin that was coming up to play a show in the next state up. Hung out with them all night long. Made friends. Hung out with Joey. Drove home and had this big weird chest punch feeling of like, oh wait, yeah, this is what it's all supposed to be about. I'm not supposed to be just playing to the venue to get a better slot. I'm not supposed to be, I'm supposed to be out here making music and creative things to meet other people that are being creative. And that changed my whole trajectory of every single thing after that. And honestly, it was too late into the tenure of Saturn at that point, I think, for it to make the difference that it needed to make. But it definitely it came to set the trajectory of what that band ended up being in its last couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it unfortunately took COVID for me to let go of that, because I still had this idea of like, oh, well, like, this isn't where the industry is, and I gotta be like where the where the music is, or like where and I mean, I'm a composer as well, and so it's like all of the opportunities seemed to be elsewhere. And it wasn't until I like got like greatly just like humbled by like it is extremely unlikely that you will ever amass the amount of income necessary to move to LA. And at least by the time that sunk in, it didn't like hurt anymore. But yeah, I spent a lot of time being like, oh no, like I know that I can get out there and do it or whatever. But LA kind of sucks, and
I have never ever liked LA. I will say I don't think that's a terribly controversial thing to say on a show like this.
Well, so I do like LA. And
I like the food.
Sure. I like LA, and LA sucks. And I think this is true of everywhere, right?
Oh yeah,
that
definitely.
like you can.
I like Oklahoma, and Oklahoma sucks.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, last week we got back from Portland. Visiting my brother lives in Portland, Oregon, and of course, like some of his friends, like talking to me, they're like, "Oh, Oklahoma is like that place pretty cool," and I'm like, "No,
No.
But to use an analogy that I think Jarvix has made is I feel about Oklahoma and Oklahoma City in particular the same way that you would about like a younger sibling, which is like, I can talk shit about my younger sibling.
Yeah.
But the moment you start talking shit about my younger sibling, fuck you.
Yeah.
We're about to throw hands.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it does kind of come with this caveat of like, yeah, but like, if somebody starts to talk some shit about Oklahoma, there's definitely like let me hear you out and see if you cross the line, because it might just be, somebody might be like, oh, stupid Oklahoma, you idiots elected Ryan Walters. And it's like, well, what am I going to say to that?
Sure,
I mean, you ain't wrong. Then people start to shit on the Thunder and you're like, hey, we earned that. But that's like I said, I'll give a big shout out to David Steele and his Creative Inclinations podcast and Rhythm and Wit. I talked about this also on his show, that I've really come to believe that, yeah, like what success is the respect of your community. Mm-hmm. And I do think that when I say that, people hear that as being, okay, well then I think that success is the people that live in the surrounding community and surrounding area having some kind of awareness and respect for you. That's not necessarily what I mean. What I actually mean is, I think that no matter who a person is, what they actually are chasing is the success of their community, but what their community is actually the question they're trying to figure out. There are a lot of people, and I used to be one of them, that was convinced that the community that they belong to is global. And if you believe that your community is the entire global world and network of music listeners or fans of a specific genre, you're not going to feel happy or successful until you feel like you have achieved a certain level of respect among a global community. For a lot of people, it's also like their internet networks, right? Their Discord, their subreddit that they're, the cool big shit poster on or something. And, these people might not really do anything of all kinds of import and might not ever leave their house or their basement or something or whatever, reductive stereotype. But if the community that they interact with and the community that they enjoy being a part of is this particular subreddit and they feel like they're known and respected there, they're going to feel like they're successful. Yeah. To be honest, I think that that's actually something that causes a lot of contention, is people being reductive about other people that feel like they have become successful in a very niche community. Mm-hmm. And people being like, oh, well, that doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Who cares?
To you, maybe.
Yeah. So really, it's about determining what your community actually is. And for a very long time, I was convinced that my community needed to be global. It started to shrink, and it definitely the same way started to shrink during COVID, right? All of a sudden, my community was the walls of my house. Yeah. And coming out of that, it was very, very clear that your community needed to be something more supportive, more, maybe structured, maybe bound by geography or something. I don't know. But very quickly, it became apparent that there was a community here that needed support, that still needs support, right? And that's not just me, but if I can be a little part of it, and it can result in feeling respected by it, then more and more I start to think, now every time that I think about moving away from Oklahoma, I think, but I've already built up so much, I'd have to start over. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I never, ever thought or felt before that.
Yeah. To give kind of a long story for a smaller point, but really just because Please, it's been a while since I've been on this podcast, and you whoever is listening hasn't heard from me in a while. Yeah. So I got to work with a nonprofit that had a podcast platform. That was probably from about 23 or 24 and until February of 26. And I started this podcast in 2016, so I already have had more podcast experience than most people. And so when this nonprofit had reached out to me to help them, I was very excited to be a part of that, and it was like some nice part-time income. But this, to spoilers for the ending here, this nonprofit was Possibilities Inc., who was dedicated to giving people in communities the tools they need to create change in their own communities, rather than coming here and be like, we're going to do these things for you. Instead, it is have your leaders and people that want to create change come to us. We will give you the community building tools, the communication tools, the conflict resolution tools, so that you can then go out and do the thing that you want to be doing. Because as a lot of research has shown, rather than just telling people what they can and can't do, it's actually way more effective to just here are the resources that you have decided you need, and you are going to use those in the way that you know you need them. And that is far more effective in building community. They started a podcast platform in 2020 because a nonprofit dedicated to community not being able to meet face-to-face whenever a bulk of what they did was meeting face-to-face was really hard. And so hey, what better way to partake in community than to have this sort of decentralized, non-linear way of connecting with community, so that, hey, you don't have to be in the room, but you can enter the room whenever you want to. And that is how you interface with community. And so I'm very grateful for my time at Possibilities because it gave me this toolbox of building community, very intentionally, very structured, very researched even. And it gave me confidence in my ability to build community. Ironically, the executive director retired, and then they got a new executive director, and I won't get into too many of those details on record, but basically all of the funders pulled out because instead of it being these funders believing in possibilities, they were believing in the old executive director. And so whenever he retired, it just pulled out.
I know all about that
yes.
fear. I was really, really worried that was going to happen when Dickerson stepped down from Free Press.
And it was, even though the time at Possibilities was great, that ending was pretty brutal. But I'm still extremely grateful for like the tools that I've been given and the ability to, I mean, I was basically running the podcast platform at that point. Many thanks to Jazz, who has been on this podcast, to like start building it. But then like we really like turned it into something and like had a structure to it. And I was doing like podcast workshops, and I was telling people like, here's how you start a podcast and how do you make it effective and all these sorts of things to not just make a podcast, but make a community through podcasts. And so maybe also part of the return to bit depth is to like, cool, I spent all this time sort of like in hibernation or in my cocoon or whatever, and I was like gathering all of these tools, and now I can like explode out and be like, cool, here's what I learned, here's how we do this thing. Weirdly enough, I kind of was already doing it, just I can now do it more intentionally. But kind of touching on this thing of like, oh, it'd be really scary to like go somewhere else and have to like do that again. I actually feel pretty confident in my ability to like, okay, well, if I have to uproot for reasons, I have the tools. I know what it takes to build community. And something that I've probably said on this podcast, maybe, but I definitely say it to tons of people, is that particularly with like Oklahoma and maybe more specifically Oklahoma City metro, is that because there is no like established thing that people are like, this is the place to be, or like this is where the like music scene is or the creative scene is, because there's nothing like established officially, anyone can make anything. Yep. Which is beautiful, and there's a lot of potential in that, but it also means that no one cares. And as quickly as things pop up in town, they very quickly disappear.
Yeah, that's been a big a big concern. I talk about this anecdote all the time from Willem Dafoe. He talked about when he was coming up and he really wanted to be an actor and he wanted to be an actor, right? He said, all the actors that move to LA, they're just trying to get into movies. And all the actors that move to New York, they're just trying to get into TV. TV was mainly based out of New York at the time, and sketch and everything. He said, I'm moving to Chicago because the actors that go to Chicago and they act on stage, they know they're never getting discovered, and there's not agents coming or there's not anything. They're doing it just because they need to do it for the craft. And I talk about that a lot because I do feel like the people that have committed to kind of being creative here and being a part of the creative community in Oklahoma are kind of for that same reason. You know, we're doing it with the understanding that the eyes of the world are not watching us. And because of that, yeah, it absolutely frees us up to do whatever we want, because all of these things that pop up, they're not getting diluted by the other people that are kind of trying to crowd them out so that we can keep doing the thing that's going to have the highest chance of success.
Right.
We've seen that happen a few times in the scene over my lifetime specifically. But something like the success that Weirder Wednesday has had, right? Something like the interest, this remarkable interest that's popped up around dissociation. Those are things that I don't know if they would, they certainly wouldn't happen the same way, in other communities. But there's definitely a lot of communities where maybe there is something more streamlined and expected out of the creative community, where things like experimental showcases and weird left field music showcases would not be able to survive at all, much less thrive for years now. So there is actually something really kind of special about being creative in a place where everybody's doing it for the quote unquote right reasons, right? And because of that, and also kind of because I have become weirdly protective of the scene and everything, because I report on it and I know all these people so much, I started getting really kind of bitter and antagonistic a little bit towards the people that do openly express still having that belief of like, I'm just trying to make it. I'm trying to break out of Oklahoma. I'm just trying. There's a couple of artists that, you know, I don't bash artists for any reason, but there are a few artists that a lot of their like social media persona is like, I'm just a struggling artist trying to break out of Oklahoma. I'm just from Oklahoma and I'm just trying to break out and get away from here. And I'm like, okay, cool, good, more power to you. Leave so I don't have to worry about covering you anymore, you know? Yeah, it's a weird fine line, you know? You want to see people succeed, you know, and I've been covering both Chat Pile and Jason Scott and High Heat since they were, you know, smaller acts around here. And so it's been really cool to see things that you have been aware of for a long time start to actually gain awareness. And it's always exceptionally cool when it's the most unexpected left field stuff, right? There was Chat Pile would have been 500 entries down on the list if you asked me to make a list of what acts were likely to break out worldwide. That's become so cool to see what it is about us. At the same time, there's also maybe a little bit of an element that the aesthetic that Chat Pile represents is also maybe what the rest of the country and the rest of the world thinks about Oklahoma. And there is a little bit of like, I don't know that they're necessarily representational of Oklahoma. I think that their whole thing is this kind of like abject nihilism that admittedly I don't really feel a lot of the time living here, you know?
I don't know. I agree with Chat Pile in a way, but I also don't feel as intense about it, I guess. Is the like, I guess maybe the thing that I said, right? Whenever people from Portland were asking me like, oh, like, is Oklahoma cool? No. Yeah. But like, my friends are cool. Yeah. We just happen to be in Oklahoma.
Yeah. Well, but cool is also, I mean, not only is cool, you know, kind of a weird random, you know,
sure.
But cool is also fickle, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. They're asking you this in Portland. Well, Portland was cool. I don't know that Portland is cool anymore. Seattle was cool for a really long time, and then Seattle was not cool, right? Cool is fickle, and cool is actually something that does end up lending itself to being crowded out. You know, I mean, you've got all of these other bands and artists that came out of Seattle that were buried and disregarded and sidelined because they didn't fit with what people thought Seattle was supposed to be.
until they broke out and then defined it.
Yeah, well, but in order for that to happen, the entire cool persona and perception of Seattle had to crumble.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, these other bands were kind of able to start breaking out of there and say, oh, yeah, well, we never, ever were just the grunge city. It's just that when the rest of the world started looking to us to be that, everybody started basically, it's what happens when, I have this tendency to draw the most insane, unreasonable correlations and allegories in my brain. Mexican agave farmers. Mexico attempted to put one of history's largest subsidies on corn, I believe, trying to replicate what the Nixon administration did for the corn subsidy. And so what happened was all of the Mexican agave farmers went in and went, oh, wow, we're going to get paid so much money from the subsidy from the government if we grow corn instead of agave, torched all of their agave crops to replant corn. And all of a sudden, the entire economy and government of northern Mexico went, oh my God, wait a minute, that was our single biggest, most important worldwide export. Get rid of all this damn corn and plant your damn agave again, right? That is the exact same thing that happens when something like grunge breaks out of Seattle. Everyone that would have been doing something else that was unique or that was more niche or that was more kind of left field goes, oh yeah, but there's so much potential in this other thing. Let's torch all of this other stuff that we've created and replant it with grunge.
Yeah.
And there was a time where that was happening in Oklahoma.
Sure. What was that?
It happened most specifically. It's actually happened, I think, a few times because of the Flaming Lips at different periods of the Flaming Lips career. There was a time in the mid to late 90s when the Lips were kind of breaking post-grunge and people started looking to Oklahoma City for the next kind of like weird, semi-psychedelic kind of druggy post-grunge. Which very nearly broke a number of big bands out of Oklahoma. There was a period of time where Oklahoma was being looked at as the next home for this kind of real resurging late 90s power pop. That there's a whole bunch of stories. There's a number of different bands that talk about this, but allegedly there were a whole bunch of other bands that were like lined up on this like festival or something that all could have been signed and broke. And then Hanson played, and they signed and broke Hanson instead. And Hanson effectively ended up kind of being a novelty act that didn't actually elevate the scene past them. Then, in semi-recent years, it's been this, what the kids, I hate talking about the kids, but what the kids have taken to call shoegaze. I take issue with that. I don't think it's shoegaze. I think it's neo dream pop. But there was definitely this sound for a while that was going to break out where everybody just started embracing this like heavily textured, heavily atmospheric, Mazzy Star-ish dream pop thing. And so it ebbs and flows, right? In the last year or so, especially, that whole kind of dream poppy atmospheric thing is starting to recede. And we're actually starting to get a lot more, even the artists that were fitting into that, like Mad Honey, for example. Mad Honey, just like last month or a month or so ago, released Bridge Over Cumberland, which is like a contender for the best Oklahoman record I've ever heard in my life. And so much of that is because it feels like they're dropping the pretense of kind of trying to have this one kind of particular sound and just really embracing a whole lot of other stuff that doesn't feel like it needs to fit into a niche to break. So
yeah, I think that's where I'm evolving towards as well, is that, I mean, full disclosure, and I haven't said this about Hypothetical in the Hypothetical podcast, but like, yes, Hypothetical is this sort of like exploration of like shape-shifting fiction and all of that. But at the same time, it's still a part of my like musical infancy as a songwriter, right? So like Bloom as my ambient album is literally called Bloom because it was like, here's the first things that I just like started making on a computer. And Hypothetical is like, yes, my like, here is songs that I've had that I like am proud of and have been working on for a long time. But it was still part of my musical infancy because I was trying to make music that sounded like real music.
Yeah.
And that is a stage that like we have to grow out of. And and like I'm proud of Hypothetical. I did a lot of like really like hard work on that and like really good work on that. But I know that my next thing is not trying to sound like real music. It's going to sound like what I want to make.
Yeah. Which is going to end up being more real if there's a measurement of real.
Sure.
I mean, it's something that has actually kind of even crossed my mind at the time. It's something that I don't think made it conceptually into my review of Hypothetical. But there is this, you know, at the risk of belaboring a metaphor or something, there is a hypothetical element to it. Every track is basically you effectively asking the question of, well, what if I sounded like this? Mm-hmm. Well, what if I made music like this? Like it is this collection of hypothetical asks.
Yeah.
And yeah, what ends up happening is, you know, I spent a really, really, really long time in some bands trying to make music that sounded like real professional music. You know, get a bunch of money and go to a professional studio and see if that sounds like a real band and, you know, mix things this way and approach things this way and, you know, have this type of dropout here and then it, you know, this type of layering in the chorus. And what you eventually come to realize is that, number one, nobody else hears the difference. Mm-hmm. And number two, if you've made something, it's never, ever, ever going to sound like something else that you've heard that you didn't make.
Yeah.
Can't be done.
Mm-hmm.
So what ended up happening was now I'm making music as Meteorology, which currently I've released a lot of this real long form, weirdo, experimental kind of, you know, it's not deeply experimental, it's long form instrumental. The entire album that I released so far, the full-length album every last Monday, is the demos that I made for myself as I was writing all of those pieces to be performed at the Old Mental Mondays showcase. I started listening to them and did a little bit of mixing, a little touch of mastering here and there, and thought, well, this sounds great.
Yeah.
But it's because if I'm not trying to base the style and the approach of that music on some other music that already exists, then it doesn't have to sound like anything. All of a sudden, it can just sound like what it is. And then I release it, and it's over an hour long with only 4 tracks, and one of them's 27 minutes, and it still ends up being the best received thing I've ever released. Because there's something genuine about it. I didn't slave over trying to make it into something that people could like by comparing it to other things it was trying to be comparable to. I'm just like, yeah, look, I don't know, here it is. Here's some stuff that I made and I kind of dig it. And everybody went, wow, cool. We can receive this fresh, you know? So yeah, I'm very excited to see what you do after Hypothetical. I think it's going to be really cool.
Yeah. Well, I think that like what you were saying also about how like, yeah, you try and make something sound like the real thing, whatever that is, and you truly can't. But what happens within that is discovery, right? You discover what yourself is in the process of trying to be something else. And that is like, you know, you learn playing guitar by learning songs that you like. And then eventually you steal some ideas and then you write your own shit. Like,
yes. I did actually have lessons and I had a teacher, but the way that he taught was he went, sit down and make a little cassette that's got all your favorite songs on it and bring it in and I'll teach you how to play them. So exactly. I just learned how to play from all my favorite songs.
Right. That's how I taught myself guitar is I didn't have guitar lessons. I obtained a guitar. It is that guitar.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, there's these songs I like, and apparently there's not like a magical thing that's happening. People aren't pulling up like ethereal chords from nothing. These are chords that exist that you can also play, and you can just learn them and play the songs. And that was mind blowing to me whenever I was teaching myself guitar. And then I was like, oh, I can use these too. Yeah. and so like it became a way of like, okay, yeah, I do a thing that is like something that I know. And then I take that and transfer it into making something else that I like. That, yeah, I get the first step was making something that sounds like something that I already like. And then that next necessary step is to then make something that is not necessarily like something that I already know. Yeah. But, and I mean, I've already been doing like a bunch of weird things. It's just not in the official, release pile.
Yeah, well,
but
me too. I'm sitting on a whole lot of stuff right now.
Yeah,
needs
exactly.
to be released. But yeah, I mean that's something that I talk about a lot. That's something that I talk about in the entire nature of creativity and art and style. In order for anyone to be unique and develop any kind of a unique style or voice or presentation for themselves, it's only ever built out of how badly someone fails at emulating something that they're attempting to emulate. And the mark, I think, of a really good, unique artist is almost always the confidence and the acceptance in doing something that fails to live up to what they're trying to emulate, but then recognizing that there's something there that can be explored and not disregarding it because they failed at cloning this other thing, but exploring it because it wants to be something of its own. And that can be really, really, really hard. It's something it's why, admittedly, and I don't want to shit on anybody's artistic discipline or anything, but photorealistic art feels weird to me. There are some people that can do absolute perfect photorealistic art. Yeah. And then they don't really necessarily do anything else to it. It's just like, well, here you go.
Yeah. You're a pencil technician.
Yeah, essentially. Right. And it's a conversation I have a lot, which is interesting. I mentioned Peter Gabriel. He is like my idol. Earlier today, just before I left to come here, I saw him in a new clip talking about exactly this, which is something I've said for a really long time. There's a difference, in my opinion, between something being impressive and something being expressive. Yeah. Right? I never, ever, ever, ever want to be impressive. That's never my goal. It's especially not ever my goal in music. And anytime I've ever written anything where I can catch myself trying to be impressive, I usually immediately walk myself back and scrap it, because I don't ever want somebody going, cool, I see what you did. I see what you did there. It's what comedians call clapter, right? Where a comedian gets on stage and they say something, doesn't Trump suck? And it's like, well, yeah, Trump sucks, but everybody's just going to be clapping because they agree with you, not because you have made them laugh. Yeah, exactly. Everybody, yeah. I just don't. That doesn't, and that's how I feel about like all of these, Instagram and TikTok artists. I'm really going hard on social media in this, but Instagram and TikTok, real artist reels that. It's just this big time lapse of them drawing something in graphite that then looks like a photorealistic, Anthony Bourdain portrait. And I'm like, cool, scroll. Yeah. All right, cool. That's impressive. It made me feel nothing.
Yeah.
There are people that can incorporate photorealism into incredibly gorgeously expressive art, like specifically Carlos Barboza. I'm a giant fan of, local muralist here in Oklahoma City. But it can be impressive if someone effectively emulates someone else.
Mhm.
It's never going to be expressive.
I disagree to an extent. So this is something I was talking to Caleb Collins about, who every time he sees me play, he's always like, dude, I love your voice. And what's funny about it is that, like, it took me a long time to, like, quote unquote, find my voice. For a lot of the process of working on, like, hypothetical, I didn't like my voice because it didn't sound like the thing. And eventually, in the same way that if you, I'm sure you know, working on stuff, listening back to your voice for such a long time, you let go of, I hate the way that my voice sounds, and just turn it into, this is my voice.
Yeah.
And whenever I started to let go of that and go, I'm not going to sound like this thing, I started to be confident in myself and go, I can achieve things. And there is a large aspect of my performance and my art that I am trying to be impressive. And the point then is not to say, look how I can do a thing that you recognize. The point is to go, look that I can do with a thing that you recognize as impressive, but in my own way.
Yeah, well, it's a weird fine line, right? And admittedly, I'm not trying to espouse some kind of philosophy or anything. No. I'm just kind of talking like I love to set myself limitations. Sure. I really love to do that. It's one of the only ways to direct anything that I'm doing.
It's how you resolve the sandbox problem.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely think that there's, well, for example, I always in every single thing that I do, I mean, literally everything I do, even all of my writing, even my radio show and everything, I'm always acutely, consciously aware of the audience and what the audience experience is going to be. And so there's always going to be an element underlying all of that of, well, I really want the audience to feel this part. Well, I really want the audience to be taken in by this part. You know what I mean? There's definitely something that can be emotionally impressive. There's something that, you know, it's all a magic trick in a way sometimes, right? That, or it's everything is a joke with a punchline, even if it's not funny, right? Everything has a setup and a build, and then it's got a punchline that delivers. There's always going to be a level of impressiveness where somebody goes, oh, I didn't see that coming. I didn't expect that. It's so, that is very, very different from what I'm talking about, which is essentially just kind of like the technical impressiveness, right? You know, a guitarist that can play really, really fast. Yeah. Cool. Mm-hmm. The faster you play, you're probably not going to really be giving me a whole lot that's going to, you know, pierce me or make me feel something. Right up until you're Randy Rhoads, you know what I mean? Who can absolutely can shred and make you feel something. But there's always an element. I mean, maybe more than just an element. Maybe the single kind of driving thing is always attempting to kind of orchestrate the audience's reaction. Yeah. You know, I don't like being the name dropping guy. I really do hate that, but I do also talk to lots of people, and the majority of the insights and perspectives that I have, they come from conversations. So I apologize to name drop, but this was a conversation that I got to have recently with Gavin Rossdale of Bush. He said the same thing. Every single thing that he writes, he is envisioning what it will be like for the audience's reaction if he's performing that song on stage. what I loved about that conversation was that I've spoken to so many people that claim that they have absolutely no consideration for the audience or anything. They're like, I'm doing it for me. It's an audience of one. I'm just doing it for me. I'm just trying to please whatever creative kind of, and then you talk to somebody like Gavin Rossdale and he's like, no. It's like, I structure entire songs based on the way that it's going to rise and build up the intensity for the audience and then explode. And then he's like, that's the only reason that I do anything. And I think, yeah, that's absolutely the only reason that I do anything, right? If I was doing it all for myself, why am I putting it out there for anybody? Yeah. So yeah, no, so I definitely get the, like, I am also trying to be impressive in that moment. I'm especially trying to be impressive in front of an audience. But there's just this kind of level of technicality that I think, again, going real hard on social media, I do think that social media has diluted the playground a bit and has convinced people that, you're going to get more likes and more shares if something is really impressive.
Yeah. So whenever you achieve something, it's not just for the sake of achieving it. It's also to like bring it back. So like whenever you climb Mount Everest, you go up there, but you don't stay up there. You can't live up there. You go back down and you share your experience. And I feel like there's a lot of creatives that reach the top of the mountain and go, this is it. I did it. Look at this. But you're supposed to gather the wisdom up there and then bring the wisdom back down. So like one of my favorite artists has been for a while now is Ben Levin. He is a YouTuber ? He makes really strange things.
He's what we call a creative.
Yes.
That's a designation now.
Yes. He makes very interesting creative things using Blender, and he's part of the reason why I started using Blender for my stuff. But like, he summited Mount Guitar. Yeah. There's nothing pretty much that you can hand him that he won't be able to like play perfectly. And so you would think, right, that, someone who has summited Mount Guitar, their music would be just like the craziest, wheedly deedliest stuff. And you listen to Ben Levin's music and it's like, oh shit, my heart has been pierced. Like, this is like, I didn't realize that you could like cut to the emotional core of things so well. And that's what, like, you reach the summit and then you come back down and utilize that wisdom.
Yeah. No, absolutely. In fact, actually, the anytime anyone asks me biggest influences, the stuff that I'm always listening to and everything, talk about another guitarist, Ben Howard. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know Ben Howard. He's actually pretty huge in the UK. And has never massively broken through in the US or anything, but he's one of these real, like, I don't know if he's like virtuoso level or anything, but he started out really as kind of one of these kind of dark folk singers that was doing a lot of like maybe kind of finger tappy or kind of stuff on the fretboard and everything. And that's like his first album where he kind of broke through. He immediately crossed over on his next album into starting to incorporate a lot of that kind of stuff into electric guitar and finding a lot more kind of textural possibilities on electric guitar that I hadn't really heard before and doing some really interesting stuff. And then by the time you get to his like third, fourth, fifth albums, he's become one of the far and away most creative guitarists in the world. Some of his stuff is him maybe playing around with just like holding an interesting chord through a whole lot of like wild choppy pedals and delays and all kinds of weird kind of like textural tools and elements. He could be, if he wanted, he could have made an entire career out of being oh, that guy that's really good and fast and tappy and everything on an acoustic guitar. But he immediately was kind of like, oh, okay, cool. I can do that. Now let's see what else I can do. Mm-hmm. I'm always more interested in that. Ben Howard actually has become probably my single biggest singular influence on music, actually, in the past few years. But yeah, that's anything, right? You get a lot of people that, you know, my entire life being a guitarist, everybody has always just assumed that I've got to be some big Eddie Van Halen nut. And I'm like, no, I've seen him live and it was boring. Mm. It was absolutely boring because I am not impressed by the fact that he can do it. I want to be moved by what he does with it. Mm. And his guitar solo, I think, was 45 minutes long when I saw him. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't care anymore, dude. I am not impressed. I'm just not.
Yeah. I was having this conversation with Bridget last night that there is no good. There is just what works in the context.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's no like, oh, this is a good melody. It's like, no, this is an effective melody for what the song is trying to say. And it's a tough thing to learn, and it took me a long time to learn it, and it takes other people perhaps all their lives to learn it. But like, it's not about like playing the right thing. It's about like serving what needs to be said.
And sometimes it's about figuring out it's about acknowledging what you have, acknowledging its limitations, and figuring out what it can say. Right? I'm a giant Tom Waits fan. Humongous Tom Waits fan. Tom Waits couldn't turn around and sing Queen, right? I mean, Freddie Mercury is one of the greatest singers in the world.
I would be interested to hear it.
It'd be fun
out of pure curiosity.
And he might be able to figure it out. He might be able to do something cool with it. But if Tom Waits stood up at karaoke and tried to sing Bohemian Rhapsody, you'd think he was doing a bad job. Yeah. Right? The context is wrong.
Right.
In the context of his own music, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard other artists cover Tom Waits songs, right? Rod Stewart does Downtown Train or something, and it's like, okay, that's fine. It's a good tune. It's a good lyric, you know. And then you hear Tom Waits sing the same song, and you do it in his way, and you go, good God, I feel that
it's the right tool for the job.
That's you say that. I think that he has literally said my voice is the right tool for the job. In fact, actually, his quote that I love so much that I would get tattooed down my arm probably is, I might have to barely paraphrase, you know, it's not the best voice in the world, but it scares children and it gets me a seat at the table. What more could you ask for?
Yeah.
I love that so much. But you know, and we also need those a lot of the time to figure out what we can do with our own tools, right? So like we were talking about the sound of your voice.
Yeah.
I struggled with that for so many years. I hated the sound of my voice and it just didn't do what I wanted it to do, you know? As I came up listening to so much, you know, Radiohead is obviously a big thing for us both. And, you know, there were singers that ended up coming into my life that started teaching me and demonstrating to me what I could do with my own voice. Was there somebody for you?
It was, I mean, I was classically trained.
Oh, well, never mind. La-di-da.
But no, the thing is that all of the vocal training gave me the runway, but what I decided to do with it was my own.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I don't think in all of my years of taking voice lessons, I don't think any voice teacher was like, here's how to do falsetto well. I came in with my years of listening to Radiohead being like, I I got this, like, and it was never a thing of like, oh, here's how to improve it. It was always like, go on. Like,
Yeah.
So,
well, and interpret that element in the way that you do. In fact, that's something that a lot of people have talked about with guitar, right?
Mhm.
Because guitarists also have vibrato in their
Yeah,
fingers,
yeah.
the way that they sustain a note. There's a real argument that every single guitarist on the planet is specifically kind of denoted according to the way that they handle their vibrato. And sometime years into, I think my wife was just like watching me just play because I just sit around and just noodle on guitar. And I think she specifically asked me about my vibrato. She's like, why do you do that? Why do you do that way? And it was the first time I ever kind of thought about it and went, oh, because that's how B.B. King does his. And when I was like a kid, I loved watching B.B. King play. And so like my vibrato was almost just identically his.
Mm-hmm.
And then I see a lot of other guitarists that do it, and it's slower. It's more, I mean, I'm the world's biggest David Gilmour obsessive from Pink Floyd. But his vibrato is all off of the tremolo bar. Mm. And I've never played with one of those.
Yeah.
I don't like them.
Yeah.
So it's like, he's my favorite guitarist in the world. He's the guy that I'm kind of trying to emulate, but there's this whole other little kind of element added into the mix that I just don't necessarily vibe with. So if I zero in the tone and the sound of my guitar on David Gilmour and then play it with somebody like B.B. King's vibrato, I've got an entirely different kind of sound for myself now. And it was the same thing, really trying to find my singing voice. I never wanted to accept that I have a lower, more likely baritone level voice, because I listened to so much other stuff, right? And I wanted that slightly higher. I wanted David Gilmour's voice, or I wanted Tom York or something maybe. Then heard Interpol. And when I heard Interpol, that was when it really started to make a lot more sense about what I could do. So then for a while, I was kind of emulating Interpol. I was hitting it a lot harder. Paul Banks has this more aggressive, kind of sharper voice that he picked up from Ian Curtis, really. Then I heard Talk Talk. And I heard Mark Hollis. And then I understood what the actual capabilities of a voice like mine in my register would be. Everything about his, I don't know if you know Talk Talk.
I don't.
They're the single most important band in the entire history of the world to me. They had 5 albums. Every one of them is this like stratospheric leap from the one before. Their final 2 albums are Spirit of Eden, which a lot of people believe is arguably the first ever full post-rock record. And their final album is called Laughingstock. I believe, with no hyperbole and no qualification, the single greatest piece of recorded music maybe in human history. I legitimately do believe it is that level. And parts of it are abrasive, and parts of it are absolutely just stark beauty. And his voice throughout it is absolutely perfect to what it's doing. Back to the beginning of their career, they started out almost kind of trying to be like a Duran Duran clone. And whereas I like those early albums and they're fun, the first one especially is just kind of like fun. The second one's actually starting really to get good. His voice, it makes sense when you get used to it, but his voice doesn't really work in that context.
Yeah.
But when I got into them, and when they changed my entire life and approach and understanding of music and what music made by, quote unquote rock instruments and non-classically trained, educated artists could kind of do. His voice taught me the kind of emotional capabilities of what I can do with my own.
Yeah. And an interesting thing, and I've been doing this deep dive into Radiohead, in kind of going back through their discography, as weird as it may sound, I have a better voice than Tom York now. Like, and that's not to be like conceited or anything, but it's more about like, well, I grew up with this music. and that became my baseline. Whereas like for him, this was like what he was striving towards, where he was like, oh, this is going to be my challenge to like try and record this in the studio and like get all the right takes and everything. But that for me was the baseline. And so we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. And so like, yeah, from the moment that like, sure, Eddie Van Halen was doing the stuff, then every guitarist from then on was like, I guess this is the bar to meet. Yeah. And so, yeah, for me, I was like, okay, well, I have to be able to sing like this. And then I've been able to go upwards from there. And there's still like vocalists that still challenge me as well, that I'm like striving to achieve the heights that they're doing. Of course, now it tends to be female vocalists. Which is its own other the physical challenge. But yeah, we've been going for a while.
Hey, all right.
So something that I forgot to ask at the end of the first episode, what track by Meteorology or otherwise, I guess if you want to choose some of your other projects, is what track is going to play at the end of the first episode and what track is going to play at the end of this episode?
I mean, because if I give you a Meteorology track, they're long. You'd have to just kind of find some.
Maybe like I could do like one half of it and then the other half of it in the end of the second one.
It really depends on how long you want to play them out. I mean, the first track on Every Last Monday, the full-length Meteorology album from last year, is the kind of thesis statement. It's called Start Where You Are. That really is the kind of driving, underlying philosophy of pretty much everything that I have and do and am in my life. I come from a long line of people that love to say, well, if you had just done this then, well, if this had not happened, well, if this had whatever, you know what I mean? And it's like, I don't care if you're standing in the middle of the ocean with the water coming up. That moment right there is where you start, right? You don't solve anything by thinking about how you could have avoided the situation that you're in. You start where you are at all times. And that really exceptionally became a big thing in the middle of COVID. So coming out of that, writing that, I named it that. And in fact, I named it that at the very, 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 very beginning. I had that title in mind the whole time I was kind of putting it together. And that's, 14, 15 minutes long or something, I think, and kind of goes through a few of these kind of different iterations of it and has a lot of guitar and has a little bit of noodling, right? So yeah, that's always going to be a little bit of the thesis of what Meteorology is, so part of it once, the other part of it, and another. But then there is also still so far, especially in terms of things that have been released and that people have, I don't think I've ever made anything in my life so far that I am more proud of than Competitive Martyrdom. I really do think that, and it just kind of fell. It's hard to say something 27 minutes long kind of fell out of you. But if you've heard the studio version, for example, it's one single take. It was made to just be a demo. There's no overdubbed anything. It's a single take of one single guitar. I'm just looping and switching back and forth between different signal paths. So that, really any moment of it, but the kind of big, weird Blade Runner sounding synth. It's not synth, it's guitar, but synthy sounding thing at the end that comes in, I am especially proud of. And a big part of that will always be premiering it for the first time, actually, where you were there, and you said some really great things about it afterwards that boosted my confidence in that to actually kind of really become something that I pushed.
Well, amazing. I will try to make some selections. And I know if it's a tough thing to like, then take apart your child and then be like, oh, here's a portion of it. But, maybe here's just a little teaser so that you go and check it out in the places that give Brett the most royalties.
Yeah, for sure. No, and well, I actually have, I have like promo edits of every track.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy to send.
Okay, yeah, sweet. Let's just do that one.
Sure.
Brett, once again, thank you for doing this with me. Where can we find you and your things?
Well, for the sake of this one, I think I'll lead by saying check out my music at Meteorology Music on Instagram, and also Meteorology. I believe it's just meteorology.bandcamp.com, because I do have a lot of stuff on there. And then, though we didn't spend quite as much time talking about journalism and reporting, I am also the owner of Oklahoma City Free Press, which you can reach at freepressokc.com. And I host On the Scene on KGOU. You can find it at kgou.org and on the air on terrestrial radio, which people are surprised to find out still exists, every Thursday evening and again Friday morning.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm Santiago Ramones. Wow, I just like stumbled over my own name. You can find everything that I do on my website, santiagoramones.com. All the things that we talked about as well. Hypothetical is not just an album, but like a whole experience to dive through on the website. And I won't tell you more.
That's great. You can read about it on Free Press.
Yes. And I always end the podcast with my 3 things. They shape my life philosophy. Those 3 things are: love never fails. It's going to be okay. I might be wrong.